Thank you very much. I do acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet and pay tribute to their history, their culture and their ongoing struggles for justice, because as we know to our shame, those struggles remain so many. Look, a huge congratulations to IFAM Australia for bringing us all together. This event is a huge amount of organisation and it's really worthwhile. It's always needed, but particularly at this time, as we've heard from other speakers. And I do acknowledge the many leaders of your community who are here. We meet at a challenging time, we meet on a challenging weekend. I also do want to acknowledge the deaths of tens of thousands of civilians and soldiers in Palestine and Israel. War is shocking. I don't want to see anybody die in war. But when mourning the dead, we need to recognise the enormity of Israel's crimes. The Israel-US genocidal war on Gaza is being extended to Lebanon, Iran and Yemen. The level of destruction, death and dehumanisation is hard to comprehend, but that does not excuse silence. I believe we should all speak up for peace with justice. You've heard other people speak about that, but we always need to put that word justice with peace, because peace, that word, has been often misused as the Palestinians have struggled for their self-determination. In Australia, we have an additional responsibility because the current Labor government is complicit in war crimes. Now, I do acknowledge Labor members are here, Federal Minister Ed Husic and State Minister Jihad Dib. Labor MPs who have done outstanding work for their community, as you know so well. I listened to their speeches closely, very important, but they did not use the word Israel, and we need to bring Israel into this conversation. We also need to be frank about Australia's links to this genocide, and this is what implicates the Australian Labor government. I do not say this lightly. I would much prefer that we were standing here as solid allies, but we need to make this a key part of our talk about Israel. It's not permitted under international humanitarian law and the Convention on Genocide to provide weapons or components of weapons to a warring party. Tragically, the Australian Labor government and many Australian companies are involved in the manufacture and components of weapons being used in this genocide. And I did want to emphasise, I've used the word components because when people have been speaking about this, particularly the Prime Minister has said, no, they're wrong, they don't know what they're talking about, we're not doing that. It's not just the weapons that are set out in these conventions, it's the components of those weapons, and nobody from Labor has denied that that is happening in Australia, and it is to our shame. When Prime Minister Albanese and Foreign Minister Penny Wong expressed concern about this war, I've got to say I feel ashamed. We need a lot more from our leaders than just expressing concern. I meet people who tell me how upset they are with these events, and they say they cannot watch any news out of the Middle East and they feel they cannot do anything. I understand these feelings, and I do have to give a big shout out to our Norwegian colleagues for that incredibly moving film that we saw with the beautiful singing and the images, the positive images, the images of struggle. I've been to the West Bank 3 times, I've been to Gaza once, and it just broke my heart to watch it. But I wanted to emphasise, while we can often feel disempowered, there is much to be encouraged by, and again I congratulate the earlier speakers who emphasised that. The voice of opposition to these crimes, the public voice, is powerful. It drives change. Across the globe, millions are regularly taking to the streets in protest against the Israeli-US war crimes. Recent decisions of various international bodies are positive. They highlight that some leaders are standing for justice and peace in the Middle East, and we need to amplify this. And I just want to share some of it with you. For ordinary people like ourselves, we can draw strength from these developments. Last month, the United Nations General Assembly declared that the occupation of East Jerusalem, the West Bank and Gaza is unlawful and must end, that every soldier and settler must be removed, that the apartheid wall must be dismantled, relevant laws repealed, that Palestinians must be compensated and allowed to return home, and that Israeli apartheid must cease. Now, I know people say it's not binding, there's no obligation, but that's not how we should be dealing with this. We need to highlight that this has been moved and 124 countries voted for it. That's 2/3 of the world's nations. Now, as we know to our shame, one of those countries was not Australia, but at least this time, and I do believe this is where some people in Labor have actually had some achievement, we didn't vote with Israel and the US, we abstained. So that is actual progress. But what we need is Australia at the UN voting for this resolution. Because the Labor government would get accolades if they took the first steps to recognise Palestine and actually do it. And it would make a contribution to help ending the suffering, ending the genocide. Because Australia is a middle-level country, not expected to break away from the US because we so often stand with them. If we could recognise Palestine, it would make a huge contribution. And not recognise it sometime in the future when we've achieved peace or some process that they've come up with in the Labor cabinet, but to do it now and do it quickly. The UN resolution is also significant because it calls for a ban on any products from the Israeli illegal settlements and further a call to cut off all military, diplomatic, economic and other relations with Israeli occupation. And I'm not saying Israel there, I'm saying Israeli occupation. So if there's any people here filming it and trying to distort the speeches, it is about Israeli occupation what we're targeting, not Israel. This is the demand we need to mobilise around. We all can help end the suffering and to achieve peace with justice for Palestine, and an important tool in achieving that is a boycott, divestment and sanctions movement. We all have a responsibility to raise awareness of Israeli war crimes and crimes against humanity, and to explain why Australia is complicit and why we have to end that complicity. The evidence of Australian complicity is very clear. If we don't speak out, we also become complicit. Peace and justice for Palestine. Thank you very much.